Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene our second of five sessions on the numerology of harmony, looking at the quantitative and the qualitative mystery and profound magic of numbers, which constitute the manifest cosmos as we know it. Before we dive into that very rich and textured domain, I want to continue my observations about world events as we always do here on Humanity Rising. And I want to draw our attention once again to what's unfolding in the Middle East as Israel and Hamas and Israel and the Palestinian people in Gaza are locked in a conflict that has caused massive bloodshed and trauma and injury and destruction on both sides. And the world has been shocked, as it was around 9/11 in 2001, at the suddenness and the ferociousness of the Hamas strike against Israel on October 7th. Now is equally shocked by the ferociousness of the Israeli decimation of large parts of Gaza. And the casualties are mostly children, because nearly 50% of the Gazan population is under 16 years old. And so the world is standing back, kind of aghast at what is happening as Israel continues to mobilize its forces. Israeli troops began very limited incursions yesterday, and there's been a lot of analysis as to why the Israelis have not launched the full invasion into Gaza. Many analysts believe that it is at the request of the United States, as the United States has sent two aircraft carrier groups to the Mediterranean, deployed the 101st Airborne Division in Jordan. And we found out earlier today that rather than deploying the second aircraft carrier group in the Eastern Mediterranean, they're going to be deploying it in the Red Sea, out of range of the Russian MiG-31 Kim Jao missiles that can strike a range of over 1,000 kilometers. I want to make two very quick points, which I think are very important for us to bear in mind as we observe the players, and in particular, Hamas. It is a matter of historical record that Hamas was the creation of Israel back in the 1990s, and specifically the creation of Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been in power for nearly 30 years. And it's worth just noting this history that, in the 1970s and 1980s and 1990s, the United States and Israel had a concerted campaign across the Middle East to subvert and undermine and destroy the secular Arab regimes that had been emerging across the Middle East, initiated first by Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, who, following Ataturk in Turkey in the early part of the 20th century, in the aftermath of the First World War, secularized Turkey and began a program of secularization whereby the Islamic faith, like in Western countries, was dominant as Christianity is, but it didn't have political authority. And Iraq followed in that pathway, Syria, etc. And those included the Palestine Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat. If you remember in the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s. They were strong. The Islamic Church was quite moderate. And these were systematically undermined and subverted by the Israelis and the United States. The US invasion of Iraq destroyed the regime of Saddam Hussein, which was known at that time to be the most secular and liberal, with women participating in government and so forth in the entire Middle East. And similarly in Palestine, the Israelis did not like the PLO, and they feared the attractiveness of a secular Palestinian state. And so they began to interact and actively supported Hamas to gain legitimacy and constituency in Gaza. And it's worth just remembering that this is what the United States did with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was a creation of the CIA. And you'll remember back in the early 1980s when at that time, the Russians had invaded Afghanistan, and the United States was seeking to subvert the Russian military presence. They interacted with Osama bin Laden and others to fund, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, the creation of Al-Qaeda. And they actively, with Israel, fomented, supported, and funded extreme Islamic jihadist groups. And as we saw with the United States, those chickens came home to roost on 9/11. And the effect of Al-Qaeda and its successor non-state group, ISIS, has created a situation in the Middle East that almost defies imagination. And similarly, in Palestine with Hamas, the very creation of Israel has now come home to roost, supported in the case of Hamas by Qatar, and behind much of the rest of it is Iran. And so this is one of the reasons why we have such a plethora of ultra right-wing, religiously extreme jihadist groups in the Middle East. They were initiated by the United States and Israel. And I think it's important as we play this out that Netanyahu is now coming to a great reckoning, as is Israel, for the folly of subverting moderate secular Arab regimes around the Middle East to sow discord and a policy of divide and conquer. And we're now approaching possibly a regional, if not global, war in that part of the world. And this leads me to the second point that I want to make, and that is that as this is happening, Hamas, the other jihadist groups that have been attacking US forces in Iraq and in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East, are being supported by not only Iran, but the emerging coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and Egypt, and a multitude of other countries in Asia and Africa. 30 years ago, we called the what is now the global South. We called it initially the Third World, a minor player in the world. And then we called them the developing world. No longer. Those countries are now developed. It's no longer the global South. What is arraying itself against Israel and the United States and NATO is the global majority. Last week in Beijing, over 150 countries were present for participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which, while the United States has been engaging in essentially perpetual war over the last 50 years, China has been methodically, carefully, inexorably building trade relations, building infrastructure, building cooperation, and now is leading the world to take itself off the dollar and begin to trade in local currencies. So this coalition is unprecedented because if you think of the US invasion of Vietnam or Iraq or Iran or the Israelis attacking Egypt or Syria, these were done unilaterally. And the countries that were attacked had very little support elsewhere, except in rhetoric. Now, there's a coalition, and that coalition is organized, and it's global. And it is now the United States and Israel and Europe and NATO that are the global minority. And this transposition of value, this geostrategic shift of the tectonic plates is historical. 500 years ago, Europe conquered the world through the voyages of discovery. That world has now thrown off the colonial yoke, is organizing, and is beginning to make its presence felt in military ways, in economic ways, and in political ways. So what we're experiencing as we witness what's unfolding with the US aggression against Russia through Ukraine in Europe, and what we're seeing in these Israeli-Hamas-Palestinian struggle is a much larger geostrategic realignment of the balance of power on this planet. And if we understand this larger context, which is at play, we'll be more capable of understanding the particular events that will now unfold. So thank you, everyone. That's my update for today. I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, Janice Hall, who is a futurist and a wellness expert on human health and well-being, and has been deeply immersed in this field for many, many years. And she's been a part of the leadership team at Humanity Rising as we continue to evolve toward Humanity Rising network. And Janice is going to moderate our session today. She has a very deep familiarity with numbers, so she'll be introducing our guests and then moderating the close of the program after the presentation. So welcome, Janice. Thank you for joining, and I turn the program over to you. You need to unmute.
Oh, I'm muting, Jeff. Yes. Thank you, Jim. It's an honor and a privilege to be your pinch hitter for the day. And I do have a great interest in numbers. As you can see behind me, my Fibonacci spiral I actually collect them. I have like folders of them. I have them on my phone. I have a beautiful one. It's the backdrop of my computer. And I have several of them on my phone from different screens. And I have been fascinated with sacred geometry and the symmetry of numbers in nature, from broccoli to nautilus shells to chameleon tails, and how they've been replicated in history, in architecture, particularly sacred architecture throughout history. And I recognize that every number has a vibration. And those vibrations have a lot to do, I believe, with how and why the numbers are situated as such in sacred architecture through history, which then is my little segue to introduce our presenters today, who are Lydia de Leon and Arturo de Leon. And so the theme today is, what if you could make a difference in your well-being by creating harmonious spaces? Can we benefit from a new way of healing architecture, through which we create transcendental spaces that replicate the wisdom of ancient temples? And we all know about feng shui, and we know that even the great movie theaters and corporate structures of the world use feng shui in terms of like numbers of positioning of energy in a room to get a certain outcome. And Lydia is a Ph.D., a Greek architect and wellness let me back up the truck. Wellness coach focused on the relationship of buildings to health and well-being. He also has a Ph.D. in geobiology, has published peer-reviewed journals and conferences, and holds an MS, Master of Science in Sustainable Environmental Design, serves as faculty at Resonance Academy for the Sacred Science of Ancient Temples. For 15 years, she studied the relationship between ancient temples and their location. She also authored a book, The Power of Sacred Location, and the creator of Healing Architecture and co-founder of the Geophilia Institute. Her husband, Arturo Ponce de Leon, is a Mexican architect, engineer, psychologist, and world-leading expert in sacred geometry, which he has been teaching for 20 years and applying to architectural design. He authored Psychogeometry, The Power of Life, Biofractal, The Science of Sacred Geometry, and Biological Architecture. And he authored The Power of Sacred Location, an international speaker, faculty member also of the Resonance Academy. And he teaches a course in cosmic design. Fascinating. I want to take this, linking the micro, meso, and macrocosm. And he's also the founder of Psychogeometry, ARCA, University of Sacred Geometry, and co-founder of Geophilia Institute. I was going to give just a one-line introduction to the two of them and let them tell their story, but I don't often tell their story as well as someone else tells it for them. And because they have such a deep presence in all of these fields, I wanted you to know their extensive background from where they will be speaking. So with that, I would love to introduce the two of you, Arturo and Dr. Lydia. So please take the stage, and I will.
Hello, Janice. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. We're very excited to be here.
Hello, thanks so much. Yeah, we're very, very happy to share all this knowledge, this experience, and these years of learning from different fields.
Yeah, so we have been in the background of what we call holistic and conscious architecture over about 20 years. And many years ago, our paths brought us together and we created Geophilia. So all our research and all our focus has always been, how do spaces affect us? Our architectural spaces and our environment around us, that we spend more than 90% of our time within our rooms and our buildings. And what can we do let's say, to create the space that is the most supportive for our health and our well-being in what we call like the 5 levels of being that we will share with you today in our presentation. And so we have found out that our literally our spaces affect us in many different ways. Materials, they can affect us in the emotional level. We have things such as colors that can create different emotions. We also have the intellectual level. So in one space, we can feel more aligned and more inspired. Sacred geometry definitely plays a role into that. And then we have things that, such as spaces that support us also spiritually. So sacred spaces that help us align with our higher selves, with our intuition, whatever you'd like to call it, and spaces that help us to be, let's say, in this higher or outer state of consciousness, as it's called.
Yeah, so we'll go through a presentation. We have a lot of slides, a lot of images, a lot of information to share. We're really happy, and let's begin. So we'll talk about sacred geometry of grid living and holistic architecture, like the process that we see as the Geophilia design system. This is one slide that we want to share with you, that we find it very important to understand the whole concept of what we have been developing through many, many years, which has to do with both the external world and our internal world. So in this axis, in the y-axis, we have the objective reality, which is the external physical objective world, and the subjective reality, the internal personal world. So of course, this is a dance between the subjective and the objective. And through sacred geometry or fractal geometry for many years, I studied architecture, but I also studied psychology. So we're applying different sacred geometric forms to change our internal world, our electromagnetic field or gravitational field. So this is one axis, which is the subjective objective world. And of course, they both have a feedback. And then we have another axis, which is this one vertical, which is the microcosm, the infinitely small scale. In the other opposite direction is the macrocosm, the external, very, very big scale. Let's imagine planet, galaxies, etc. And then in the middle, we have the mesocosm, which is our human level, our scale. And what we have, and many other physicists have discovered, is that these 3 levels, they have the same geometry or the same principles that unify them in these different scales. Because of course, if you think about something very, very small like the quantum scale, you can think that has nothing to do with our mesocosm level or nothing to do with the macrocosm. But there is a whole flow and a whole structure of thinking in how to put them together through unified physics. And then we have this other axis, which is this x-axis, which we call them coherence or incoherence, or let's say chaos and order. And from this chaos and order in our more human level, we can go through love, which is coherence, or through fear, which is incoherence. And all around the world, we have every moment this decision to be in love, incoherence, or to go towards fear, incoherence. So this is the main concept that we come from. Well, my name is Arturo Ponce, and I studied telecommunications engineer. So we're working a lot with the computers and satellites and, like all these radiation. So I have studied a lot what happens with radiations and what happens when you incorporate sacred geometry into these fields. I also studied psychology, architecture, and I've been learning every time I'm teaching sacred geometry. So this is some of the images of courses that I have done for many, many years. I studied in sacred geometry with different professors, but I was collaborating very close with Dan Winter, which is a researcher, a scientist from this unified physics way of thinking. And we also were teaching a lot in different countries, mainly in Latin America, in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Mexico,
Spain.
Yeah, Spain, about how to apply sacred geometry to transform our subjective internal world. So this is different courses with different groups. This is one very big event that we had in a university in Mexico for architecture. It was actually the first international congress for biological architecture in 2007. And it was amazing the amount of people that gathered towards this subject, and how since then there was already this idea cooking of how can sacred geometry actually change and apply. Nowadays, it's amazing. We're really happy to see that almost everywhere nowadays, architects and designers, and they're incorporating these principles. Some of them not even studying it, just naturally incorporating fractal geometry and this, this order. And I mean, this is a little bit more personal, but this is the way I actually met Lydia. My passion since life is mountain biking and biking itself, scuba diving, and I have traveled in a lot of countries. But I met Lydia in a bike trip that I did from Madrid to Istanbul, and I met her there. And of course, that absolutely changed my life. Here, we were in that conference where we met with Dan Winter, with this physicist, this scientist.
Yeah, and Dan Winter is he's like a physicist that has given, let's say, solutions in many issues in classic physics in a unified way through sacred geometry. So he's like a really deep teacher of sacred geometry. And so I was there because I was giving a presentation about ancient temples. So my background is architecture and sustainable environmental design, but then I did a PhD on how, let's say, location can affect biology. So this is called geobiology. And that also has been a big question in my life since many years. Why is it that ancient temples appear to be located in particular places, and what are the characteristics of them? And I had a lot of questions. So I ended up doing a PhD of many years because I wanted to reply these questions myself. I wasn't satisfied with what I had around. And so I've been giving presentations in different places around the world on this subject. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. And the thing with the ancient temples is that the more we understand of this ancient technology and how these healing spaces, or let's say sacred spaces, I'm not taking it into a religious background, but sacred spaces in terms of the coherence, and we will explain in our presentation today, you will understand what we mean by that. What can we learn? How can we decode that from the ancient temples and apply it in our modern spaces? How can we recreate modern healing spaces, meditation spaces, healing centers, and even our own houses? And what do we need to incorporate? And so we also collaborate with Nassim Haramein. I've been many years with him and part of his temple retreats, and sharing my part of my research. He's also an incredible guy. If you don't know about him, you can look, and he's again in the unified physics and solving all about the structure of the vacuum or ether, if you like, through sacred geometry. It's really amazing, his work. So really, there are amazing lighthouses in the world. And of course, doing, let's say, retreats and visiting sacred places around the world. This is Teotihuacan, Mexico, and reactivating them. And this is something we're really passionate about. And I think it's really important more than ever, because there is so much, even scientific research, as I could share with you, but for that we'll need another presentation, that when people go back to sacredness, and when we meditate together for peace, and we feel peace, and we project that into the world, crime goes down 80%. And we need to do that now more than ever, not just because a war that has been there just has a flair, but we need to do that once and for all and live at the end on a place of peace and make this planet a planet of love and not of hate and violence. So I think from our background, not only with creating harmonic spaces, but reactivating sacred spaces and returning these temples back to their original frequency, I think it's a really important work to be done from all of us collectively. And so architecture, it's actually a Greek word. I'm Greek from my background. I'm born in Greece. And the word architecton in Greek art, ancient Greek actually, means archi is like the beginning, or let's say the birth, the beginning of something. And then tecton means to create, to bring to life, to manifest, to build also. And so it's considered, let's say, the birth of creation, because really, if you think about it, everything that we have around us, from the computer we are using to the building we are in, to the roads that we have in front, to the cars that are moving around, all that is created from architecture. Some kind of architect brought that to life. Even if he's a car designer or a computer designer, at the end, this is all falling into architecture. So architecture, I think, has a big responsibility there, because architecture is responsible for the world we are living in, the quality of the world we're living in. And also architecture is a blend of science and engineering, which is the more masculine part, if you like, and art and design, which is the more feminine aspect. So we blend both. It's a place to blend both the right and the left hemisphere.
So what is sacred geometry and why is it important? Sacred geometry or fractal geometry, it has nothing to do with a religious aspect. It has more to do with mathematics. It's exactly the metaphor of how the universe creates itself. It's the patterns, the geometries, the ratios, the flow forms that the universe found the best solution to keep creating life. And if I could synthesize in one image, would be this image. This image is a torus. What you see here, it's like an apple shape. Let's say it's a torus, like a donut. And then you have one donut inside another, inside another, inside another. So this donut creates two movements. One is the movement of implosion when the outside is going in. And then from inside, when it's going out, you create explosion. And of course, when it's moving, you're creating both at the same time. You're creating implosion and explosion. This is how the universe expresses. When it's creating implosion, it's creating order, or it's creating gravitational fields. Imagine this energy, it's moving like a spiral, like a tornado, and it's creating a gravitational field. When it's going from the center outside, in the explosion part, it's creating electromagnetic field. Now, in unified physics, both are different expressions of this torus shape, or this movement. Electromagnetic field and gravitational fields have the same explanation, because they're, of course, they're unified. We're made of atoms, and we live in a planet that live, in a universe, etc. So it's one linked scenario. And we can see here in sacred geometry was created by the universe. We embed sacred geometry, our DNA, our body, everything is created through these ratios, different ratios. And then as different civilizations in different timelines, in different spaces, geographic spaces, we have created, or we have mimicked nature. We have created music, art, different manifestations of architecture, temples, etc. But we first learn them from nature, and naturally we can express them. So the more you study sacred geometry, actually, you discover that it's something natural for all of us to create this beauty. And we can understand, this is a little bit more technical, but it's important to share with you that the universe has both the pentagonal form and the hexagonal form. So a pentagon, of course, it's a five-sided polyhedron, and hexagon is six-sided. But in sacred geometry, it has been said there are like two main flows or two main characteristics of sacred geometry, directions of sacred geometry, which is the pentagonal explanation of the universe, and then the other is the hexagonal. And what we have to conclude is that both are actually correct. There are some people
two sides of the same coin, let's say.
Yeah, there are some people that say that sacred geometry, like the space-time or the structure of the universe, is based on an hexagon, and they have a lot of explanation about that. For example, Nassim Haramein, he explores deeply how the universe is embedded into an hexagonal shape, or in a flower of life pattern shape. Whereas Dan Winter and other researchers says that it is a pentagonal shape. Well, our conclusion is that it's both, and we'll explain how. So this hexagonal shape has to do with a type of Archimedean solid that is called cuboctahedron, from the 13 Archimedean solids. Some researchers, Nassim Haramein were saying, but also Buckminster Fuller was talking a lot about that, about the cuboctahedron. And this geometry gives a stability. It's a feminine geometry, and it's the geometry of the vacuum, or the space-time. And it's a very well-known sacred geometry shape, which is the flower of life, that has been found in everywhere in the world. And it's talking about this hexagonal, because of course you can see here the X, Y, Z axis.
Exactly.
And this is a 2D representation, but you can also see it as a 3D object. So you will see spheres, and you can see it as a cube. Imagine this cube is creating more and more and more cubes. Like here, like in this image, you can see here, like these bubbles. And when you embed these bubbles, you will create a tetrahedron, which is true that the tetrahedron is the minimum 3D geometry that exists. Some people...
Sorry, just a second. So for those of you that don't know, this is the tetrahedron, right? It's like a three-sided pyramid in a 3D world, so it has 4 faces.
Yeah, and this tetrahedron, it's the minimum expression of our reality. There is nothing less. Like these ideas that some people, philosophically speaking, have about the second dimension, the first dimension, it's just philosophical ideas. They actually don't exist. They exist in our mind. But the universe is created from 3D and on, from 3D objects and on. And when you have this tetrahedron, you have an opposite one, which is the feminine and the masculine for the tetrahedrons, and then you create a Star of David, or a double tetrahedron, and then from there you can reproduce this more again and again and again in a fractal iteration pattern. You just keep repeating that, and you create more surface. You create more and more and more surface. This is a cuboctahedron, which is this 13 Archimedean solid, and you can create one cuboctahedron inside another, inside another, inside another. And this is part of the explanation of our universe as a nest of waves or energy that is stable.
So what Nassim Haramein explains, and why we think that it's important to share this information always, is that he explains that the nature of space-time, or vacuum, or the field, imagine the field that it's there, and it has been proven by now, in the past was called ether, for example, from the ancient Greeks and other philosophers. But the field that connects everything everywhere, according to his work, has exactly that geometry. It is based on this cuboctahedron, and it has like very specific parameters. And so this is how the cuboctahedron actually is born out of the flower of life. And so as we see, here is a place where science and spirituality come together, which in our opinion is, it's again the two sides of the same coin, and something that has been considered sacred and important, and as a geometry that has a coding for deep meaning, which is the flower of life, Now we know that also scientifically it's there in the, let's say, in the structure of the field or the vacuum. So that's really, really important to understand.
And then from the other side, imagine this structure, this invisible structure, geometric structure that is made of cuboctahedrons or flower of life, like an extended version of flower of life, is when the universe is stable, when it's creating stability. But then, of course, the universe is moving. So because the universe is moving, it has to create other type of geometry that can distribute efficiently energy and matter. And that's when the pentagon comes and the golden ratio that you may have heard about. It's everywhere. It's in our biology. It's in the proportions of our body, in our hands, everywhere you can find it. The golden ratio 1.618.
Or otherwise called phi ratio. Maybe you have listened by that term.
Yeah, phi because of Phidias, a Greek architect. And the golden ratio has been studied by different physicists, but we're talking here about Dan Winter. It creates fractality. It's a masculine geometry. It creates distribution. And it's the geometry of how nature connects everything in different scales.
And the word fractal, if people are, first time listening about this word, is basically when we have the perfect self-replication. So maybe you have seen these images that you zoom in and you find the same image and the same, or you zoom out. And this is how nature designs, because it creates similar patterns and it creates similar proportions across different scales. And that's what gives continuity in the universal design.
So imagine you have these flower of life patterns, these 3D fractal flower of life patterns, which gives stability, and then all this energy matter has to be distributed. So the most efficient way that the universe found to distribute energy is through golden ratio. Mm-hmm. Here you have phi ratio, like the spiral itself, and this geometry itself, because the pentagon by definition is built in phi ratio, creates a suction, an implosive or explosive suction energy that will allow things to move. So here you can see the pentagon that has phi ratio. This is the symbol of phi. And let's say this is 1 unit, and then this is 1.618. And from the pentagon, you can see a lot of amazing esoteric knowledge, because a lot of the esoteric teachings, they take information from sacred geometry, and they were, for example, the Bible and all these sacred, amazing books, they talk about numbers, and numbers come from geometry. So here you have, for example, 72 degrees, and in the Kabbalah, they talk about the 72 names. And then you have, for example, if you continue these two lines, this angle is 144 degrees, which in the Bible is mentioned. And it's just amazing when you start going deep and deep and deep. It's just amazing how it's related about. And for example, in this phi ratio 1.618, it has to do of how it's the best way to relate the total with the small part, that the small part can fit in the larger part. So it's the Trinity in Christianity, where they say that the Son is as the Father, like the Father is as God. Let's say this Trinity, they're talking about this perfect embeddability, or this perfect way of putting something in a fractal way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And also there is in Genesis, there is the phrase in ancient Greek, actually, enarchin ino logos, which means in the beginning there was the word, in capital. But the word logos in ancient Greek means, apart from the word, it means also proportion. And so there is a lot of written research about it, but it's highly probable that they actually mean the golden ratio, because the first thing was created in order to manifest a physical reality. You need to do it through the phi ratio, because it's the perfect way to create a connection across the different scales. So you're creating a universe and galaxies and solar systems and planets, and inside that, the different parts, and then in the microcosm you go deeper. And all these in between them, as you will see in a graph in a bit, they all fall under a perfect golden ratio. So in the beginning was the word, the proportion, the perfect fractal proportion in the world is golden ratio.
Yeah, and here you can do some research, online about sacred geometry and about the specific phi ratio, but you can find that it has amazing mathematical formulas where 1 + 1 divided by 1 + 1, etc., etc. It gives you the phi ratio. It's just amazing. Like, it's the perfect way to distribute energy because it's the most efficient. It's the one that creates less chaos or friction.
Creates continuity, basically.
So,
and how is that continuity? This is a great example. So, for example, if anybody take your hand, let's say, you will So you will see that this part, to just your knuckles, right? To this part, to this part, to this part, and then you continue to your elbow, etc. This is all golden ratio. So that makes that these different pieces of our body, and it's actually found throughout all our body, communicating between them because they have the same resonance.
The same happens with the different expressions of art and our heart pulse. So this amazing piece of art full of sacred geometry. So this is the golden cut, where in the back you can see it's amazing. You can see here this big structure is a dodecahedron. From the 5 platonic solids, you have one of them is the dodecahedron, which is 12 pentagons. And then you see here this, like it's representing Christ with this angle. So if you measure the angle of these hands, it's actually phi ratio in a circle. So it's 137 degrees. So if you put a circle and let's say you have 0 degrees here, exactly here will be 137 degrees. So the opposite is 273, which is the angle of these hands. It's just amazing how different philosophers and artists have embedded everywhere. This is Le Corbusier, the work of Le Corbusier, and he wanted to create a fractal embedded formula for design, for all type of design, not only architecture, where he took 1.82 as a standard height for a human being, and then he divided by phi ratio, and he was using this tool or this grid to create chairs or to design, furniture, etc. We can find it everywhere in nature. And this is the graph, amazing graph from the work of Dan Winter, inspired of the work of Geophilia, which is a professor in Czech Republic. And what this professor discovered, not coming from the unified physics, he was doing his own research, and he discovered actually that the radius of the hydrogen was exactly Planck length times phi ratio. And I will explain what's Planck length. Imagine you have the whole universe and you want to go to the smallest units you can go, to the really, 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 really small unit of the universe. And this small unit, imagine it like a little torus shape. This is called the Planck length. And this Planck length is really small, like it's 1 times 10 to the power of minus 34. That means 34 zeros and after
the comma.
Yeah, the comma. So it's really, really small. And this unit, this Planck length, what this graph explains is how from the microcosm, what we were explaining at the beginning of the talk, is related to the meso and then to the macrocosm, because you take this Planck length, which is this unit, very small, you multiply it times phi in different power, and you end up specifically having the radii of the hydrogen, which is Planck length times phi to the power of 116. You have ATP, ADP, which is how we can generate energy. You have photosynthesis. You have actually the measurement of 1 foot for designing, for architecture. You have the Schumann resonance, the harmonics of the Schumann resonance, and the heart rate variability at low frequency. We have the year of Earth, Venus, the precession of the equinox, like the galactic year, in different powers of these.
So what this chart is trying to show us, and this amazing research, it's basically saying that there is one common language across the different, let's say, scales of the universe, from the ultra small, which is the cutoff value for our own universe, the smallest wavelength of light we can actually observe, which is the Planck. From there, from the hydrogen atom core and going up to our own biology, up to the galaxy. So it's showing how all these connect through phi ratio and how important that is for the continuity across the different scales.
And one question that I had as an architect, as a designer, because we have done many projects all around the world, was why we have forgotten, why it's not taught in schools that this is crucial, that it's so important that the places that we're living and we're designing are actually embedded in this same cascade of frequencies. So imagine it is like a puzzle. So if you don't have the correct size, it will not fit. But if you have the correct size, it will fit.
Exactly.
So this is the important value, which is the foot. From there, we can actually have specifically what are the frequencies in hertz that are the most harmonic frequencies.
And here is where, as architects, we are called to create according to the universe, according to the big architect of this universe. The least we can do is to observe how the microcosm is designed, the very, very small, the macrocosm, and then in the mesocosm, where we are in architecture, at least to try to create something that is in the continuity of these two, the very small and the very big. Maybe you have heard of something called cymatics. It's an engineer that is called Hans Jenny, the one that you see in the picture. And what he did is that he placed on speakers that had a vibrating plate over them, he placed rice or sand, and he tuned his amplifiers with different sounds of different frequencies. And what he found out, very interestingly, is that according to the frequency of the sound that he put, meaning different hertz, he got a very different pattern that was formed over the speakers on the vibrating plate. And these are some examples of what you see. And he got also more complex ones or less complex ones. He found out that higher frequencies, for example, tended to give far more complex designs, whereas lower frequencies gave more simple ones. And also the vibrating plate shape played a role. As you can see, there are ones that are circular, or there are ones that are square, because the plate itself had a different shape. And that gives us something very interesting, because it shows us that there is an absolute relationship between frequency, sound, and geometry or shape, if you like. And that means that if different frequencies and different sounds give a different geometry, then that means that every geometry has embedded within it a different frequency, and so a different quality. And that's really important when we are choosing proportion or geometry as designers or as architects, or artists, or wherever the field is. Also in music, that applies absolutely in music. And then another very interesting example that shows how sacred geometry impacts our biology is the work of Gerard Pollack. And he proved that there is a fourth phase of water. So we have liquid, solid, and gas, as we all know, but there is a fourth state that is kind of crystalline, if you like, and it's also something in between the solid and the liquid. So it's kind of a more oily state. But what he found out is, first of all, that water had different properties. And the most important one, so the one on top, is the normal water, whereas structured water, literally, he saw that the molecules, the H2O molecules, were forming perfect hexagons. Now, this water can be obtained in different ways. For example, spring water has that structure, the natural water of springs that flows in vortices and different flows, geometrical flows. Also, our intracellular water is structured water. And also, if you have common water and then you create a process of structuring through vortexing, through geometrical application of water, then it becomes structured itself. And also he found out that this water can provide far deeper hydration in our body, better detoxification, and better nutrient absorption. Obviously, because this water is the same water that our body has, so it can absorb it in a far better way. So this is a great example to understand how geometry affects biology and also our bodies even more. So imagine the geometry that we are in every day, all day, actually structures or not the water in our body, and we're made 60–70% water. This is another amazing example from research done on biomimicry, which is like a direction in design where nature is studied in detail, and then they extract how nature solves a particular problem and they apply. What you see here is a perfect golden ratio vortex. And they used that in a 3D. They created these vortex spirals in 3D, and they were able to eliminate chlorine consumption. And because of that, they also didn't have any bacterial contamination in huge water tanks. I'm talking about industrial level. And so a small vortex device that moved the water and structured it, the water was so perfectly, let's say, aligned and had the best health, if you like, that it would not allow for bacterial contamination, which is really amazing if you think about having a solution about water without the need of any chemicals. And then there is also work on biogeometry, and I have also studied that, and they found, this is just one of the many experiments they have done, when they applied specific geometric shapes on apple trees, they found out that the parasites were eliminated and they had significantly increased yield just from the application of pure geometry. And this is another example with milk, where we like to show a lot of scientific experiments, because we also come from all the spiritual, esoteric aspect of things, and also all the scientific, because that's how our let's say, our beings are. Our brain is both masculine and feminine. So when the two come together, it's a very good way to take in the information. And so in milk was kept under different pyramid shapes. And you have the control one, which is the one here on the top. So this is the control, and this is showing bacterial contamination. Whereas the other ones that were kept under the pyramid had, as you see, no or far, far lower bacterial contamination. So just the presence of geometry can change so much in our biology. And there is far more work done from many people. And also there is a lot of work showing that the shape energy gives different efficiencies in antennas. So according to physicists' work, they found out that the perfect antenna is the one that is like a resonator. And a resonator is basically, if you can imagine, like something that has so harmonic geometry that when you touch it, it makes a ring, so it resonates. And this is how the ancient temples were created. Arturo has a course in the Resonance Academy called Cosmic Design. Right now it's in Spanish, but very soon in English. And talking about temples, it's very interesting to see that temples were designed to be as resonant chambers, meaning like a perfect antenna. And I would like to share with you my research on that, which for many years I've been looking into geobiology. And geobiology is basically a science that shares or shows us how a site or location with the various characteristics of the soil, of the rock in that place, or the fields, the magnetic, the gravity field, can affect our own biology. Hippocrates, who is the father of modern medicine, at least from the history we do know, he has a book called Concerning Nutrition. And there he mentions clearly that geographic location and ground typology are equally important factors as nutrition is. And this is in the bottom, the original ancient Greek text with the translation. But basically he says it's not only to be healthy, it's not only important to put together your age, your climatic conditions, what you eat, of course, but also actually your geological background. And there is something called geophysical anomalies, which means in simple terms, you don't need to remember that term, but it's basically a place where there is a shift in the, let's say, in the value of Earth's magnetic field or gravitational field. There is a shift means it's actually far higher or far lower. Here is a very interesting research of St. Petersburg in Russia. And with black, you just see the roads, so that's not important. And then with gray, you see fault lines, seismic fault lines, literally. So there is like a underground, there is like a crack, or there is two different types of rock that meet there. And with yellow, there is an elevated cancer incidence rate, 7 to 20 times more than normal. And then with red, we have over 20 times cancer incidence range, which means, in simple terms, that people that live long-term over faults, and especially on their junctions, because as you see, most of the elevated cancer incidence rate is on the crossing of two fault lines. That can be very problematic over the long term. But then what I was looking into in my PhD is that I was looking at temples all around the world, and I will explain this slide, and I found out that the majority of temples, at least the ones built until the 1500s, because after that, let's say this knowledge started to be lost, seem to be placed exactly on areas that have these anomalies. So here's an example from my own research. Also, it's in the book if you'd like to look into it more. Left, it's UK. On the left, we have a radon map. And with blue, you have the areas that have higher radon. And for those of you that you've never heard of radon, it's basically a radioactive gas. And so the areas that have darker blue color, like almost black, are the areas that have the highest, let's say, value or concentration of radon. And then with red, the red dots, we have the concentration of megalithic monuments, such as stone circles and dolmens and menhirs. What blew my mind was that they followed exactly the same pattern. And this, you know, I have seen it in many maps. This is France, again, uranium content and radon on the right, and they follow the same pattern. Looking at ancient Greek temples, here is a map that shows with blue dots the temples of Asclepios, which were officially the healing temples of ancient Greece. And with with purple lines, we see the fault lines. So the majority of these temples were placed close to a fault. Like there is almost no temple that is placed randomly in an area that has no fault close to it. So that was very, very curious. And then I started asking myself, first of all, how did they know to place them there? And secondly, why? What was the reason that they were following so much the geophysical anomalies, or these places that have radon, they have radioactivity, or they have fault lines, or other like subterranean anomalies? And then looking in a lot of scientific research, I found out about a phenomenon that is called hormesis. And hormesis, in very simple terms, it says that any agent that is stressful can be very detrimental over the long term, over a long-term exposure or a big dose. But for a short dose, it can be actually beneficial. And that applies to pharmacology, that applies to nutrition, fasting. You know, you overdo fasting, you have negative results. You overdo exercise. And I'm sure many of you have felt many times in your life that a difficult time or a stressful time that was in a short dosage, you know, it was not a continuous stress, it actually very beneficial because it helps us grow and have breakthroughs. Over the long term, if we have chronic stress, obviously that's not helpful. So there is an optimum dose for things. And then if you overcome that optimum dose, then you go into actually negative results. And so from what I found in my research, temples were used as a healing technology because they were meant to accumulate the energy of the earth in these particular locations that had these anomalies. And then through hormesis, people were exposed to that. Obviously, the temple has more like advanced technology things. And if you're interested, I will show you later. I have a course on that and a book if you want to read more. But their complex technology was to create an environment like a big bioresonance device. So you will enter and you will have that effect over a short term. And nobody was living in the temples, not even the priests themselves were living in the temples. And these temples were created as a dielectric capacitor. So this is like a complex term, but they were harvesting the potential difference between the earth and the sky. And they were using sacred geometry to structure that field and create the most harmonic field to be used for healing. So this is my course that's in the Resonance Academy. It's called The Sacred Science of Ancient Temples. If you want to learn more, I have really poured all my love and my passion for the temples. What we have been doing since many years, and we have started with Greece, is to put together an international team of professors and engineers and historians and a lot of other people, and we want to carry out measurements, and we have made a protocol for that. We took the permit for 50 ancient Greek temples. There is a page on our website that once we're looking for funding. These are the 50 temples that we have gotten the permit for. And once we have the first funding, we're ready to begin. So I'm very excited to share that with you. We want to, of course, publish all these results and create like a short documentary. We want to also, let's say, expand that in different temples around the world. We're already looking for Mexico and Teotihuacan and other places in Europe. So it's really important that, you know, we have scientific results on the nature and design and the effects of ancient temples. I already decoded a lot, and you can read about it in the book or in the course, but of course there is more, and the more data we have, the more it allows us to recreate that technology. And we can, because today, honestly, as architects, we can tell you, we don't have the technology or the science to rebuild a Parthenon or a Pyramid of Giza or a Teotihuacan. We don't know how it was done, and there is a lot of questions, but this is for our own benefit, for our health and our well-being. This brings us to science harmonics, space harmonics.
Yeah, so what we have done is taking all this information, all this knowledge, ancient knowledge, and apply it into our modern daily life, which is what we have. So the science that we use is the science of space harmonics, which is how to create this fractality or this embeddability between the very big, the very small, and we in the mesocosm. So through different materials. Choosing different materials that are according to what we want, choosing different geometries, reading the Earth's magnetic field to place the best we can, a house or a hotel or whatever infrastructure we're designing, checking what are the artificial electromagnetic fields and if there is any other information present in the space. Of course, we know that our emotions, they have, our heart literally has 5 to 6 feet. You can read the electromagnetic field of our heart. And they they create this field. We are creating this field. We are informing this field. Like you can see here in the image, this is a huge torus with different spirals. And here in the middle, you have 5 cubes and 1 dodecahedron. And part of the science that we do, that we implement in the projects, has to do with wave interference. We want to create constructive wave interference and avoid, as much as we can, creating destructive wave interference. What this is a constructive wave interference, which is you have a wave. Imagine you and your partner. You want that you and your partner create a bigger wave. You don't want to, you and your partner cancel each other. And the same thing happens with spaces or with our emotions, our thoughts, etc. So what we do is that we analyze the space, the geometry it has, to see what is the music and what is the harmonics that they will create.
And what we want to do is, like the image you saw before, the different elements that constitute a space, which is the color, the shape, the layout, the materials, the radiations that are present, to put them all together in a way that blends in the most harmonic way. So that's where wave interference or harmonic inclusiveness has its place there.
Yeah, harmonic inclusiveness has to do with, okay, I'm designing my house, I'm designing a hotel, I'm designing a villa or a city. Okay, what's the best way to create the roads, to create everything, so you have the most amount of energy and matter flowing through them with the least resistance, the better way to design it. And this is related to music harmonics, because music creates harmony.
It's basically, if you can imagine, to understand what space harmonics is all about, how to blend all the different elements that constitute a space, as I was saying before, is the same way when you have like an orchestra, and what you want to listen is just harmonic music, meaning all the different instruments and all the different frequencies that are a part of this music that we're listening, they blend together in a very harmonic way. So that is the way to create space harmonics. Epigenetics, it's a science by Dr. Bruce Lipton. He wrote the book, The Biology of Belief. It's absolutely one of my favorites. And he explains there that it's actually not our genes that are responsible for any disease, apart from the 1% of really genetic predisposition that cannot be changed. But anything else is actually triggered from the environment. So of course there is a background that is our genes, and then there is environmental triggers that can turn on and off different genes to be expressed or not. So we all have in general different genes for cancer, we have genes for longevity, we have genes to thrive, to self-heal, or to self-destroy. And then it's up to us, according to different, let's say, factors, that they will help us turn on and off on the best genes that we can and off the worst, let's say. And this is how we have genetic expression. Genes plus environment is our genetic expression. So we have, this is a very empowering, actually, conclusion of Bruce Lipton, because it means that we are not victims of our biology or our genes, that they are not the ones that have the fault and they're responsible for everything. It's actually up to us. And first of all, environment is the environment of our cells. And the environment of our cells is affected, first of all, I will say, from our emotions and our state of being. It's affected by our nutrition, our thoughts, radiation around us. And then if you extend that and we realize that we are a colony of some trillion cells, then basically the environment of all our cells is our room, is our building, is our cities. And so all that plays a huge role in our health and our well-being in many different levels. And then there is this amazing research of the blue zones, and it's 5 places around the world that they found out that they have the highest longevity. So it's Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, in Sardinia, in Ikaria Island, which is actually in Greece, and in Okinawa in Japan. And they tried to find out what were the most important things that these places had, and they allowed for people to thrive and have the highest levels of longevity. And according to Dan Buettner, that did that research, he said, your environment is the biggest, most impactful thing you can do to favor your own happiness. And so we understand that after our own physical skin, we have, of course, our clothes. The next skin we have that we're always surrounded by is our room and our building, and of course, our close environment and our city, if you extend that. But we're always wearing a room. Maybe some of you have never thought about that. And I also, when I was firstly reading about that many years ago, I never realized that we're actually wearing a room. We're wearing the walls all day over us. And so we spend 90% of our time inside buildings. And this design can provoke sickness, but it can also support healing and health.
So we'll see now examples of projects that we have designed and some have been built very specifically, and solutions about that. But this light harmonics has to do with our internal space, the internal space harmonics, and the external space harmonics, how we internally can influence the external world and how the external world can influence us. So this has to do with the masters that we have in Geophilia, where we explain more in detail all these levels and how to link them and apply them. It has to do with a lot of information about it.
Yeah, but basically what we're trying to say here is that if you are looking for harmony in your life, what you need to do is bring in harmony your internal space and your external space. And our internal space, it means how is our vitality, how is the physical body, how is our emotions, our intellect, and our spirit. So we need that. And then in our external spaces, we have different levels that have to do with our environment, like an architecture. And for example, the chemistry of, for example, toxins that we are surrounded, electromagnetic things such as, let's say, radiation, other things that emit like EMF. And there are many other things in every level. It's a lot to cover today, but I'm just giving you a basic example. Then we have gravitational things. We have informational things. We have sacred geometry and other things that create an informational field that we are bathed in. And then we have quantum things. And so these are also represented by the 5 elements: fire, earth, water, air, and ether, that, you know, they have their own geometries according to the Platonic solids, but this is like a very condensed version of an overview of how you can create harmony in your life. And if you can create harmony, you can be blissful. And that's the goal of sharing you this information.
And also you have different levels of health. You can heal yourself with chemistry, or heal yourself with electromagnetic fields or gravitational fields or informational fields or quantum fields. So these are different levels of it. So here we'll see some examples about, this is living off grid. This is a community that we designed, some houses, very simple houses like a golden rectangle. The Geophilia design system, that is what we apply, that has to do, first we do the client analysis.
So in the Geophilia design system, and what we always propose, we have like these important pillars. And first of all, we do what we call a client analysis, which is we do the 5-element chart, we do voice harmonics, and we need to determine when we're designing a space, if we want really to thrive in a space, it needs to be a space that is designed custom for you. And that means what geometries, what style of interior design, what colors, and all these things are really important. So it's a space that supports you. And we do that with a different whole set of analysis and studies. And from there, we make conscious decisions about the design. If it's a redesign or a already created, like, we can apply that to existing spaces as well. Then the second part is a land analysis. So it's important to not place a building randomly because of XYZ. Of course, if we already have a location, then we have remedies. And if it's like placed on an anomaly, let's say, then we can have different technologies to balance out the negative side effects of that. And so here are examples where we, for example, we found underground water and we had to avoid that area. If we have a big piece of land, or what area is the most implosive, the most harmonic. And then in the third part, we of course have the architectural design, and we do incorporate different things such as sacred geometry, auspicious layouts, ancient traditions, bioclimatic design, of course. We love permaculture, we're both trained in that. And of course, ecological materials, and then all the space harmonics technologies. This is all what we try to incorporate always. And then in construction, we also like to elevate the space harmonics with different techniques. And one is through creating custom woven patterns and grids under the finished floor. And this is an example that we have done, and we have done it in many places, and we have seen great results. Our seeds have grown 3 times more. I really like amazing results with people. We can apply that in art. It's an easy way to elevate your space. And this is a few projects that just to have an idea how these can look.
So this is a master plan for hectares land. So here it's a huge project, parts of apartments, auditorium, a place for a hotel, etc., etc. And you can see here all this sacred geometry embedded in the whole design, creating these scenarios like this fractality. And you can also use straight lines. Not everything has to be to do with curved lines. This is a community center made with super adobe, everything made with like these earth shapes or these earth domes. KMX is a chakra healing hotel in Riviera Maya, which again has to do with these shapes of first where to locate the place of more power, more harmonic inclusiveness, and then from there, this hotel is based on the torus shape. So this is the reception, this is the shalab, this is the hotel itself. So it has, of course, the geometry aspect of it, and then the real aspect of square meters, etc. This is a Vipassana healing center, which they ask us to have explicit geometry, which some people like it and they just love it. Some people not, they prefer more modern or less explicit geometry, so it can be adapted to any style of architecture. Aiki Healing Center, this is the way it was built. We designed it, and it was built like that with a beautiful waterfall and the Zen garden. Yeah, the Zen garden, and the water is actually spinning and circulating around. We designed it. This is the way it was built. It's in the center. It's the geometric shape of it has a big internal patio, so you can have a lot of sun. This is the way we design it with the different types of facades. And there is another project, Pentagon Community. This is a house with many members of it, so it's a house for each member with explicit geometry. A beautiful landscape somewhere in like 2 hours from Mexico City. Montessori BS school. This is a school that was designed in a double spiral shape, and it was built all with natural materials, like in a very natural, like really natural way. The owner, the client, he wanted to use no concrete, nothing industrialized almost. So it was just a beautiful, all made with bamboo, designed with sacred geometry. This is a villa in Costa Rica, which of course it rains a lot, so we have to do a proper design for a lot of rain. And you can see here the tricaya, different elements for sacred geometry, the internal stairs.
And then we have the Geophilia Masters for people that are interested, where we have 12 modules that we teach all these things in more detail. It's a course that anyone can take. You don't have to be an architect or designer. We have had healers, psychics, also architects, scientists, like anyone can take it if you have interest for this. So we have talk about fractal science. We have a module for sacred geometry, obviously. We talk about bioclimatic design, earth radiation, artificial radiation, and then more about auspicious layouts, permaculture, ancient temples, and then far more into details of how to make a space, let's say, more harmonic.
Yeah, and all the students that have enrolled into the masters, they have, of course, a dream. Sometimes you know, I want this house, I want to live like that. So we apply everything to a thesis, like how to actually make it happen. And create.
Here are books. So The Power of Sacred Location is the one from my PhD research that Arturo helped me write it and put it together. These are Arturo's books, Sacred Geometry and Architecture, and of course, he also has in Spanish. So
and in English.
And in English, yes. You can find all those in the website. Website is geophilia.org, and we will also put it in the chat. And if you go to our website, you can have like this amazing free resource that we put together after over 15 years of research, which is what are the most important hacks to create a sleep sanctuary. So what are the most important things to have the best restorative sleep in terms of architecture? You can just download that for free from the website where you see this window.
Yeah, because we realize that one of the most important things to have health is when we're sleeping. Like, how can we create a peaceful, harmonic environment so we can restore, you know?
Yeah, because sleep is something that affects so much our health. It's where the regeneration and the self-healing happens. It affects our hormones. It affects our immune system and our ability to manage different things. And so, of course, emotional health and so on and so forth. And we think it's really important, and architecture has a big part to play there. So you will learn so much. It's many, many pages PDF, and make sure you download it after it. You will miss a lot if you don't.
I would like to finish with this quote: "Love is the gravitational force that holds us together, that transforms us and transcends us." And well, this is our website.
This is our email. So contact at Geophilia, and then if you just have www.geophilia.org, this is just our website.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I am trying to get us side by side. Gallery, here we go. Okay, that was brilliant. It was awe-inspiring. And I just want to say to the audience that they've shared what we can learn and decode from the innate numerological underpinnings of our universe, using ancient spaces, and how we can apply this to today in our homes, our work, and our sleep. That's so important if we could really have a coherent space to sleep in when all of us are busy running around and, looking at the blue lights of our screens all day long into the night. If we can do this, we see there is hope for the future. On the other side of chaos, we can imagine a coherent world that we can create by intentionally using the land, to the building shapes, to the materials, recognizing that we have a say in our health, that epigenetics shows us that all of these constituents are in an interplay of how we live our lives and how we respond. And when each of us, whoops, I just disappeared. When each of us find coherence in ourselves, we find our authentic self, we surround ourselves with coherent spaces, we intentionally focus our lives on coherence, this has a ripple effect throughout the planet. And as more and more people are interested in the harmonious and coherent effects of architecture and the conscious construction of the world that we live in, I think that we all have a chance. I just wanted to say that I was fascinated myself years ago when I went to Teotihuacan and had such an extraordinary personal experience. And I wanted to ask you, I don't know if this has an impact, but I know that they found large quantities of mica there. And this mineral was like 3,000 miles away, was the closest. And it was in almost every building. Yeah, and I know you were talking earlier about dielectric capacitors, and I know that mica is not only heat tolerant and insulating, but it is a dielectric capacitor. And there's also a spiritual aspect to which I'm always fascinated with, the minerals and the resonant spiritual aspects they have in our lives. And I think I wrote this, it helps us recognize our flaws without self-condemnation, so we're able to effectively address negative personality traits and negativity in the world around us. So I was fascinated by this intentional use of mica, but the early days of the construction of the pyramid. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but it looks like I was fascinated with that because of my personal experience. If you have anything to say with that, otherwise, I will thank you for your brilliant and awe-inspiring presentation. And I hope that you are training others around the world, because as many structures are falling apart, physical structures as well as financial structures, and the systemic world that we live in is really collapsing, that the emergence of people like you who have the sensitivity to developing such clarity in the spaces around us and the necessity for them is, we need more people to understand this portal of hope that you are providing us. And so any last words that you might have, I welcome before I close.
Well, thank you so much. We're really happy to share passion. And the most important from all the research and everything that sometimes we read or documentaries, we have so much information. It's actually to apply it, even if it's, in your desk, in your room, like in your house. It doesn't have to be. Sometimes we have seen 3 years ago when many lockdowns happened all around the world, many people were contacting us because they realized, I want to live in nature, I want to live off grid, I want to get out of here, and I want to have the ability to be self-sufficient. So we have many projects that from people that they were looking for freedom, for nature, and then eventually this crisis disappeared, and then they went back to the old self. And what we have seen through these years is that it doesn't have to be a major change to do a change. It has to be maybe just a small change. And this small change will keep adding and adding and adding and adding.
Small steps.
Small steps. That's what we have seen from, can really benefit.
Well, now it's small steps, but I expect those small steps will lead to exponential change, especially as, again, more systems fall apart and dissolve, and more young people are waking up to the awareness of intentionality in creating spaces. And I hope that you're reaching the architects of the future, because I think that this work can grow exponentially. Right now it may be trickling out, but the potential is vast, and in my opinion, quite necessary for the healthy, coherent furthering of the human race in concert with nature on our planet. Not only is it about biomimicry, but Mother Gaia told me once and took me on a galactic tour and said, you may practice biomimicry as you're all learning, but I practice cosmomimicry. Follow me. So with that, I will invite everyone to join us in the after chat that Stan has put here. And we will close until next time. Again, thank you so much for your vast and brilliant work.
Thank you so much.
Till next time, everyone. Bye-bye now. Do I end it, Stan? George, Georg.